This panel session works actually very well with the preceding one because the issues of building regulation, construction, and the issues that Luke Luddy and the panel were talking about do in fact feed in to the question of how you as the City Council regulate land use. So you have this fairly distinctive role in the city in controlling land use through the ULURP process. What I've handed out to you is a brief bios of the panelists who are here with contact information so that if you would like to talk with them afterwards, you can find them. And then if you move a few pages in, you'll see a brief summary of the zoning code itself, which is my elementary approach to sort of giving you some of the basics. So if I can, like professors do, just bore you for a second with what the code intends to do and has been doing since 1961, and before that, its predecessor in 1916. So it separates uses. You will all get familiar with R, C, and M codes. And as one of your colleagues mentioned, M is divided into three parts, with M1s being not so toxic and M3s being more hazardous. It has residential codes that go from 1 to 10. It does other things as well. It uses this floor area ratio as a controlling metric, and it allows you and the city to use floor area ratio or FAR bonuses. It's your incentive. It is the way you, in fact, motivate the development community to respond to things you think appropriate. There are already bonuses for community facilities, and there are also bonuses for inclusionary housing zoning, which are fundamental and important things for you to think about. It gives a set of established as-of-right principles to owners, and it also allows them to trade and sell air rights. So you will discover one of the things that happens quite a lot is trading of air rights both around parcels, but you have the power to create the ability to trade air rights within zones. So the theater district allows you to trade air rights within the entire zone. Hudson Yards does the exact same thing. And the planned expansion of the East Side office market, if you get to see that, does in fact include the same thing. So you have the power to regulate the movement of air rights, which are a very powerful development tool in the city. It allows it to be changed through the Uniform Land Use Review process. It is one that you play a powerful part with, along with City Planning Commission. There are hearings that happen at the ground floor at the community district level, and then you get to vote most of the major changes that exist. Among the things you will quickly discover is that the city is moving both up and down. So there's upzoning and downzoning, meaning large numbers of your communities will not want further development and will simply push the code down or regulate its increases. And you in fact have the ability to regulate where growth occurs and where not. It's one of the more powerful tools. NYU has done a very useful report on the upzoning and downzoning of the city. And among the things it is not, you'll have to look elsewhere for a distinctive urban plan for the city. This is not what the zoning code does. On the prior administration, they created their own the plan for housing called New Housing Marketplace, and Plan NYC is the city's plan for sustainability. There's the same thing on resilience. So you in fact operate in a world where there are distinctive sets of planning documents which are important to you, at the same time that the zoning code is intended to be slotted in or fitted within that. I'll stop soon, gentlemen, so this will end. I'd list some of the criticisms, since you as the folks who are responsible for its administration need to be aware that this is not a document that has gone unscathed. It is frequently called overly cumbersome, being 1,000 pages plus. Amanda Burden created this as the shortcut, gentle folks. That is the shortcut. So this is the pretty pictures, this is the glossary, this is the definition. For those of us who teach this, this is the essential teaching tool. For those of you who administer it, on the applied side, it's probably something that your staff might enjoy having. I made copies of the glossary should any of you really want to take home a glossary of terms, but it is an extremely thick document. It has been criticized by Ron Schiffman, who is predecessor to one of our panelists, we'd hoped would be one of our panelists, Adam Friedman. So Ron has been quite strong on it, and the folks on Pratt, so I give you one quote from Ron. The system has opposed mandatory inclusionary housing programs because they fail to truly see the dangers of a sorted out or segregated city. So it's among the things that you need to think about. You will have many people testifying before you who see the zoning code as one of the few places where you can actually adjust and make decisions about what goes where and possibly even who goes where. So I will stop at this point. I will not introduce the panelists because they're all very eminent and you have their bios in front of them. But I've asked them to address two very simple core questions. First, what is it about the city's zoning code that they both like and the things that they might recommend changing? And then after that, following that, we will have a conversation about the issue of the zoning code and affordable housing. So if I can, Mike, if I might begin with you to start on the first question.
Thank you. I think just to kind of use this opportunity to provide a little more of what John was providing, and that is a kind of a bit of an overview of the zoning resolution. Because as you get into individual details, you'll be overwhelmed with the individual issues, but hopefully this will provide an opportunity to provide some larger framework to make some of those decisions. John mentioned about the 1961 zoning resolution. I'd make two observations about that. One, that it was a massive downzoning of the city of New York. Prior to 1961, the city believed there was going to be 18 million people. And there was fear that this was going to overrun the city and overrun services, so we had to find a way to constrain that. And the mechanisms that John talked about floor area ratios and things came into being. Before that, there was no definitive floor area ratio or density that you could build on a particular site. So if you look around the city, Empire State Building, Chrysler Building, John also alluded to East Midtown, where there are numerous buildings which are now termed overbuilt. And by overbuilt, it means that it's built much bigger than the 61 zoning resolution would permit. And what that does, and East Midtown was an illustration of that, is that if you've got a building much bigger than you can build today, you're not likely to tear it down because you have floor area or revenue sources that you're not going to be able to recapture if you rebuild. And that was part of the genesis for looking to make changes in East Midtown. But at 50 years now, since 50 years since the 1961 zoning resolution, I think there's an opportunity to provide a little bit of a framework to make some kind of judgments about what the history has been. And in some ways, the resolution was really more restrictive. For example, you now had, as John pointed out, three areas: manufacturing, commercial, and residential. And you can't now build residential in manufacturing districts. As I was telling Richard, when I grew up on the west side, I lived in a manufacturing district. Well, it is now a manufacturing district. It was not uncommon to have residential uses located near industrial uses because as the economy was basically industrial, people could walk to work. So there was a proximity there that made housing a priority in terms of where it could be built, as long as it wasn't built in the most noxious locations. 61 stopped that. It said no more residential uses in manufacturing districts because they thought the manufacturing sector of the economy was going to grow. In 1961, we had 1 million manufacturing jobs. By 1975, we were at 500,000, and today we're under 100,000. So this economy that we expected to occur didn't. The growth didn't occur. And what we have seen over time is the underutilization of a lot of these manufacturing districts. So that whether it's Soho, Chelsea, the Greenpoint, Williamsburg waterfront, Hudson Yards, all of these were former manufacturing districts that really didn't allow for housing. So by having this very restrictive zoning resolution, we basically precluded certain uses that now we find desirable. And maybe in 61, we didn't have the same kind of affordable housing issues, the same kind of need issues that we have today. But the resolution, by being so restrictive, precluded changes in the economy over time to allow for shrinkage of some uses and expansion of other uses on particular locations. However, there's another side to that story, and that is Midtown South. Midtown South was, again, heart of manufacturing in the city of New York. Manhattan was basically an industrial center. Midtown South, however, is now probably the 5th largest central business district in the country. Why? Because the zoning resolution here allowed for commercial uses to take place within manufacturing districts. So that you had, and you also had a very loose description of what constituted office use. We know office use in the 1950s is not the same as office uses today. You know, we're a madman society today. Today we're at some other, high-tech society. But it was flexible enough to allow for changes over time, so that Midtown South really migrated from an industrial center to a major office center today. So in one sense, there's a real benefit, if we're flexible, and there's some downside to being restrictive. So I think as we look forward in terms of what we do with our resolution, we need to keep these kinds of, examples in mind.
One more point, Mike, and then we'll move.
Sure.
We'll come back again.
Tell me what you want me to do.
Well, want to know your final big major issue for the council?
My final big issue would be to say that as we start to craft zoning resolution changes, we need to keep flexibility in mind. And on the other hand, I think we also have to be fearful of trying to be so precise about what can go where that we run the risk of making these areas obsolete for those uses because of market changes and end up with large underutilized areas of the city with lots of difficulty to change them.
That's great. Thanks, Mike. Richard, can we give your thoughts since you have actual
Sure.
real-life experience with the council?
Thank
with
you.
that.
I'm glad to be here today. Obviously, the role of the City Council and the Borough Presidents, they have a very important and powerful role in helping shape our neighborhoods and also individual projects. In answer to your question of some of the things that one wished might be different, obviously, the zoning resolution is very complex. It requires a series of professionals, lawyers, engineers, and so forth, and architects, obviously, to design buildings and determine what can be built on any particular site. It's hard for a layperson to get their arms around all the regulations, especially the various zoning districts, sub-districts, special districts, landmarking issues that involve a lot of these things. It's very difficult. So city planning is a resource. The department's a resource. The website's a resource. I would recommend people become familiar with it and use it to your best ability. The Borough President's Office also is a resource for council people. Some of the things it does well is, as a process, it tries to build consensus. The process involves at least 3 or 4 public hearings, which is an opportunity for people to raise issues, concerns, for the developer or the private applicant to put forth their vision of what they're hoping to do, and for residents who are affected to really make known their concerns. And then hopefully between the various elected officials, the council, the borough president, and the commission will take all these factors into consideration when they make a final decision. Needless to say, everyone's not happy, but hopefully a compromise is developed where the benefits of a new project are realized, but the negative impacts are minimized. The process in land use in New York requires this delicate balance, and it's one that we'll never get right. It's an iterative and a continuing process. We want a timely process. Developers want to be able to build their projects quickly and get approvals, but we also need a thoughtful process. We need to have the input of communities in projects, and so those tensions actually work against each other. But one of the good things about ULURP is that it does have a time clock, and once a project is certified, within 7 months it has to be approved or disapproved. The tension between predictability and participation also is there, and your offices, the council offices, as well as the borough president's offices, are helpful to get people sitting at a table to look at opportunities and projects and to be able to make, hopefully, informed decisions. And I'll just leave it there for now.
Okay, that's fine, Richard. We can go back. Mark?
John,
your
thank
fix
you.
of that?
Thank you for also mentioning the NYU study.
Yes.
I do work at the Furman Center at NYU. Lots of very good data for you on what's happening across the community in the state of New York City's housing annual report. I suggest that if you haven't had a chance, take a look at it. It's online, and we can also get you a copy of it. We've also done a lot of work in the zoning area, so some of my remarks will reflect that. As an economist, I think the most important thing about New York City is how much it changes all the time. You know, new sectors are developing, new communities, new neighborhoods, quite honestly, new ways of living and working together. And the one problem that zoning has is it's relatively hard to change. So it has categories about what's manufacturing, what's not. I mean, we don't have mass production manufacturing here. I guess I'll speak here for Adam Friedman a little bit, but we probably need some, he would argue we need some areas that zoning doesn't allow anything else but manufacturing because there are other uses aren't really compatible with it. And notion of, he would say, I think parallel to affordable housing, we need some areas where there's affordable rents for industrial startups, et cetera. But one thing that has been mentioned here, the city has gone through a major set of rezonings. About 30% of the city has been rezoned. It's not clear, we'll talk about this in the affordable housing, what the impacts of there are on the inclusionary zoning ideas that are out there. But there have been an increase in the amount of living and working space, in mixed income, mixed use neighborhoods, so where you can combine housing and other uses together. And I think we're seeing, particularly in Brooklyn, neighborhoods where the co-location of a place to work and a place to live, and maybe even living workspace, seems to have been very important in what is the new economy, some people refer to as the innovation economy, that really is developing here. So I guess my overall observation is zoning is a very rough tool for guiding the economy. And in some cases, the economy is going to develop on its own, and we need to make sure that, quite honestly, that the zoning doesn't restrict what goes on there. We will, I think, talk more about housing, and I think here we have an overall issue about supply of housing in the city, not just the price of it, but do we have enough? Do we all have the same vision that we're adding 1 million people over this decade, and where are those people going to live? And if we don't provide places for them to live, what's going to happen to the price of housing? So I'll leave that till we get to that topic.
That'll be fine. Thanks, Mark. I've been encouraged to give you plenty of time to ask questions, so we'll have one brief set of responses to the question of how the zoning code might be linked with other kinds of tools that you have at your disposal, including funding tools, to increase the supply of affordable housing, and indeed, as the last panel said, even increasing the supply of affordable nonprofit office space, which I think is within the purview of the council. So again, if I can go in the same order, Mike, if you can just briefly address what you think are the core ways which the code and residential development might work together for the real estate community.
Well, a couple of things. One is, I think we need to create greater density opportunities for housing. We need to find places where housing is likely to be able to be built at a market rate, and then find ways to incorporate affordable. I think the other issue is really not a zoning issue, but it's a cost issue. And lastly, I think there's been a lot of discussion about neighborhood preservation, and a lot of that leads to down zonings. The other tools that have been used to kind of protect neighborhoods have been landmark designations. When we do that, we are taking away housing opportunities. And in the city that needs to build 400,000 units to accommodate the growth of population, and which is probably about 300,000 units short of meeting its affordable housing needs, I think we should be looking at every decision we make in the land use area through the housing prism. And I'd throw out one suggestion. I know there's been a lot of media attention about increasing taxes on vacant land as a way of trying to encourage development. I say maybe that should be coupled with some upzonings on those land, so that there's an added inducement to develop them, because just raising taxes is not going to get you the housing you want. But if you create greater density there, maybe it creates another opportunity to create housing. And we've seen that density has been a real stimulant to creating development, whether it's in Hudson Yards, Greenpoint, Williamsburg, or other places. So I think we need to look at how we can use density increases responsibly to get the goals we want from the process.
Good. Richard, your thoughts on?
Yeah. No, this is a very complicated issue, and one which a lot of factors play a role. the zoning has one small piece of it in terms of density, as Michael mentioned. But obviously, the affordability of building housing in New York is an important issue, and there are issues around the building code that might be looked at, and other tax incentives. Because at the end of the day, we have a system where, for the most part, the public sector has not built directly housing, affordable housing, and it relies on the private sector. So the question becomes, how do you create the proper inducements without giving away the store in order to get the public needs that are desired? And there are a lot of factors here. I mean, I think Michael's also right. Looking at areas to increase density, I think, is important to create the overall production of housing, and looking at the right mix of incentives and bonuses to get the affordable housing will be very important for this next administration.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, so we're going to have more conversation on this. I'll try and summarize everything
Well,
at this point. I'll try. We're going through this pretty quickly, so.
I realize that, and I apologize, but there is the hope to give the council a chance to
Fine.
ask you questions, so if you
Okay.
could do it in a summary fashion.
No, right, so I'll cover all those bullets
Thank you.
and do that quickly. So I've done an awful lot of work in
Well, he can say
affordable
everything
housing
we
and
didn't
could go on at length here, so you'll forgive me. I won't do that. So in thinking about zoning, transit-oriented development is a key term, TOD, and I think the rezonings that were done took some advantage of that, but I would add that to the discussion of where ought we to think about having, if we're going to increase the supply of housing here, where are the opportunities to do that? There is a whole discussion there has been about inclusionary zoning, and they're taking advantage of maybe upzoning and allowing developers to have more density, but in exchange for that, building more of the affordable housing. If you're not aware, affordable housing is extremely expensive to build. That is, housing is expensive to build, and to subsidize it down to a level that is affordable is huge. And if we can figure out how to do that through providing more development opportunities here and less out of the budget, I'm sure you're all very aware of the budget issues that exist here, that would be my choice of term, clever, but it would be a very practical way to try and get some very expensive housing get housing built that's very expensive to be able to be affordable to low, moderate, middle, whatever income group you want to. My own view, again, as an economist, is you need to increase the supply. One thing that we are definitely suffering from is we are a prosperous city. Population's increasing. And employment's increasing, and if we don't increase the amount of housing stock just at that level of broad level of thinking, we can't be surprised that rents are going up. One of the trade-offs, obviously, is between neighborhood preservation, which much of the zoning has done. It didn't, quite honestly, take advantage of all the opportunities for transit-oriented development. Didn't take advantage of all the places that are avenues where you could build higher density. I'm not the political person. You've got to deal with those. I know those trade-offs in a lot of communities resist that, but you also, I think, have to carry the responsibility for the city as a whole in terms of making sure that we do have enough supply of housing available across the city. One other area we haven't really talked about is transfer development rights, which is another way of allowing more development. Quite honestly, the zoning, we can't create land in New York City. We have only so much here, but we can create FAR. And quite honestly, that's the equivalent. And that's what, in terms of inclusionary zoning, that's part of the principle there. That's part of the principle of East Midtown. And it's something I think there's going to be a lot more discussion about, and how can the city use its zoning responsibilities here and therefore control over FAR to encourage developers to build more and to build more that's affordable. So why don't I leave it there?